Now to one of the most watched races on the Florida ballot. Incumbent Congressman Carlos Curbelo and challenger Debbie Mucarsel-Powell are statistically tied in the polls.
They are running to represent South Florida's 26th congressional district, Key West to Southwest Miami-Dade, nearly 800,000 residents. It is trending blue, but fairly evenly split between Democrats, Republicans, and independents.
Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo was first elected in 2014 and is running for a third term in Congress. Debbie Mucarsel-Powell is a Democrat making her first run for Congress, but she's long been politically involved in the Miami-Dade community and in the Keys. Good morning.
Great to have you in.
So glad that you both
Michael.
consented.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Moment. Let me just briefly explain the ground rules for you and for the folks at home. You will have up to 60 seconds to answer questions, 30 seconds to rebut. You will each have a 30-second close, but we're going to get right to the questions. Congressman, let's begin with health care. You voted to repeal Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act. Nearly 90,000, or a little more than 90,000 of your constituents are enrolled in the ACA. They want to keep it. What do you say to them, especially people with pre-existing conditions?
Well, Michael, Glenna, to my opponent, thank you for this opportunity. The first thing I'll say is that I made a commitment when I first ran for office that we would replace our health care system with something that works a lot better. And what we tried to do, both in the effort that we had in last May and also in bipartisan efforts, is how do we keep the good in today's healthcare system and replace what doesn't work? So I think the good is covering people with pre-existing conditions. I know this. My wife has a pre-existing condition. She had an eye accident when she was a child. Allowing young people to stay on their parents' plans. This was especially important when the economy was struggling. And eliminate any kind of gender discrimination in our healthcare system. Those are all big achievements of the ACA, the last reform we had. What doesn't work is the part of the bill that was designed by and for all of the big special interests in healthcare, right. The hospitals, the big insurance companies, and the big pharmaceutical companies. Right now, under the ACA, taxpayer dollars get transferred directly to those companies. There's no transparency. What we want to do is give that money directly to consumers, empower patients, and put them at the center of the healthcare system.
That'll be a minute, just so you now have a gauge what a minute looks like. Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, you actually have healthcare administration in your background at FIU.
Correct. That's correct.
I saw some of your promotional materials. You are very proud of public-private partnerships for healthcare that you created. But the question is, as we've been discussing, the ACA, Obamacare, what it meant to do is to bridge covering the most vulnerable in our community, that accessibility, with making healthcare affordable for everyone, including healthy people. What kind of things in your background like that would accomplish what has not been accomplished yet?
Thank you, Glenna and Michael, and I think that healthcare is a top issue in my community, but I want to take this opportunity to address something that was extremely troubling and disturbing. On Wednesday, we wanted to talk about healthcare. We were at a political event where the chairman of the Republican Party, along with a former senior aide of Congressman Curbelo, planned a hate rally along with the Proud Boys.
I want to stop you. That happened. The topic here is healthcare. The debate is very tightly timed.
Yeah.
It's
just such a disturbing. There were screaming slurs, hate slurs. We were threatened, and I think that this is an opportunity for Congressman Curbelo to apologize to the ladies that were there, among myself.
This might be an opportunity for you to tell viewers about your healthcare plans, and that's
and I have.
At the moment.
And I will, and I can tell you that as the Associate Dean of the Medical School, one of the things that I did was create a program with the team called the Neighborhood Help Program, which brings medical students, nursing students to some of the most vulnerable areas here in Miami-Dade County. And what we were able to show is that for every dollar that was invested in our program, we were able to save the state $15. It's one of those innovative programs that I want to bring to Washington, D.C., and the fact that the congressman can sit here and actually try to justify the vote that took away health care, that threatened to take away health care for more than 100,000 families in my district is truly shameful.
This is, do I get the 30 seconds?
Yes, go ahead and rebut.
Yeah,
yes.
This is a perfect example of the type of campaign my opponent has run. All distractions, all attacks, no ideas. I told you how I think we can make health care better in our country. She brings up this issue. And yes, I condemn all forms of hateful political speech. We all should, whether it comes from the right or the left.
Was what happened on Wednesday hate speech?
Absolutely. Any type of violent expression is unacceptable in our country, and I condemn it. And she's being dishonest again. The gentleman she mentioned was never a senior aide of mine, but anyone who does that is wrong to do it. Now, what I will say is that since she brought this up, bringing someone to our community to campaign who has embraced Fidel and Raul Castro, embraced Nicolas Maduro, and was the only vote when the United States was attacked on 9/11. Barbara Lee was the only person in the Congress, 434 out of 435, who voted against our country responding to the 9/11 attacks. That was the true slap in the face to our community.
A question on taxes and the economy. You were on the team that actually wrote the tax bill, the GOP tax bill. It cut corporate taxes. It gave a tax refund to almost everybody, yet it also put the deficit on track to reach over $1 trillion by the year 2020. Do you have any qualms about that? And is there a fix that you see now needs to be made?
So I was always for deficit neutral tax reform, but I will say that we're seeing growth in the economy that we haven't seen in years. For a long time, the wealthy people, like my opponent, were the only ones benefiting from the economic recovery. Today, more and more Americans are enjoying that recovery. We doubled the child tax credit. That's something that helps low and middle income families the most. $1,400 of that child tax credit is now reimbursable. We doubled the standard deduction. That helps low income families the most. And we also closed some of the special loopholes that for people who own big mansions and pay high property taxes. We reduced their ability to deduct their taxes from their federal tax bill.
Response here, rebuttal.
Look, this was the worst economic policy that Congress has passed. Everyone agrees with that. You actually are proud of writing a bill that passed tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans and doesn't work for the working class families that live in my district. This tax cut has been proven to benefit yourself. You are accusing me of something that you may be talking about yourself, but the problem is that we don't have any transparency from you, Congressman. You have a lobbying firm that is right now benefiting from the tax bill, but we will never know how much you're benefiting from it because you refuse to disclose it. Now, we need to pass common sense tax reform that's going to benefit all of us. We have working class families that live in my district that are making under $55,000 a year that are not seeing any sort of relief. What I want to do is bring that common sense so that we can pass policies that work for all of us.
All right, we're going to take a break.
Real quick, she just said a blatant lie. I don't own any lobbying firms.
When we come back, you'll have a chance to respond to that, Congressman. Stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back. Live in our studio this morning, Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, Democrat running for Congress in District 26, and the incumbent Carlos Curbelo. All right, you just heard Ms. Mucarsel-Powell say that you, as a member of the House Ways and Means Committee, wrote this tax bill, helped write it, and that you wrote it to benefit your family and the company that your wife runs.
Right. That's absolutely absurd. It's a complete falsehood. Our tax relief bill delivered relief for every American. And I have a simple solution for those, like my opponent, who can afford to be offended by tax relief. Look, for the median family of 4 in our community, this bill represented $2,000 in tax relief. A lot of people have come up to me and said, you know what, with that extra money, I might take my family on a vacation. Maybe that's the difference between a car payment, making it or not. But for those Americans like my opponent who can afford to be offended by this bill, the solution is easy. The tax relief that she got, she could go home today, write a check to the U.S. Treasury, and deal with it that way. And then those Americans who actually need tax relief and don't have extra money lying around, they can keep their tax relief.
All right. Well, if I could, I need to follow up with you. Just very briefly, the Congressional Budget Office this week released a report that said that the government spending is up by 17% this year because of this tax bill.
Exactly.
And that the federal deficit has been increased by $779 billion. So in a sense, And then Senator Mitch McConnell said the way we're going to have to pay for it is by cutting entitlements. Now,
yeah, and I think that's why these elections are so important, because Republicans have it in their plan, including Congressman Curbelo. The first way that they're going to pay for this deficit is by cutting Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. We have a congressman who has actually called Social Security a Ponzi scheme. Now, I don't know who he's referring to that can afford, this tax bill. I'm still paying my student loans. I started working, Congressman, at the age of 15, and I haven't stopped since. I came as an immigrant to this country.
I understand you haven't worked for 3 years.
We have a mortgage.
Is that true?
I have always worked my entire life, Congressman.
It was reported in the Miami Herald that you haven't worked for 3 years. Is that true or not?
It is insulting to a woman. I know that you may be used to talking to women like that, but let me tell you something. I have been one of the main breadwinners in my family. I have never stopped working. I was the associate dean at the medical school. I have been dedicated to this community for the past 20 years, trying to find solutions to better people's lives. Congressman, your record speaks completely the opposite.
Yeah, let me just say, Michael, because I have 2 daughters and a wife, I don't need to be lectured by anyone on how to talk to women. And what I suggest for you is that you stop lying. You've been lying since this campaign started. You just said that you've never stopped working. The Miami Herald reported that you haven't worked for 3 years. And we know where your family has gotten a lot of its wealth from overseas and from gangsters. That's public record, and it's in federal court documents.
God.
When you're going to lecture, be very careful, because you might just get what you wish for.
Well, we have, in fact,
respond,
well, but first, I want to show people at home an ad, which is not, in fact, by Mr. Curbelo's campaign, but by a PAC that supports him, that shows allegedly your connection to a Ukrainian oligarch named Igor Kolomoisky, and it says that he has supported you and that has paid your family through your husband, who is a lawyer, $700,000. Explain, are you connected to this Kolomoisky, this rather shady character?
Once again, absolutely not. Debbie Mucarsel-Powell is the woman that's running for Congress, Congressman. My husband, and it was reported in the Miami Herald, he was an attorney at a U.S.-based company. Igor Kolomoisky is one of the investors of a parent company. We have nothing to do with this man. So, no, we have not been subsidized by someone that you're accusing me of. And it's truly shameful and completely tone deaf for your party to now show a negative attack with a man with a gun pointing at the screen. My 13-year-old son was watching the baseball game with my husband the other night, and he saw that ad. And I have to tell you, for someone who's lost my dad to gun violence, to have an ad like that shows the tactics that your party and that you're using, because you're desperate. You have nothing to run on.
I just think she just said something dishonest. Again, federal court documents show clearly that her husband has received hundreds of thousands of dollars from this man. This is not just some shady character. This is someone who's accused of murdering people, hiring people for murder. So we all have to be responsible for who we decide to associate with, and this is what your family has decided to do.
Are you going to take responsibility for being associated with a white hate group?
I'm not associated with any white hate group. Look at me. Trust me, I'm not associated with any white hate group.
Will you call upon the chairman of the Miami-Dade Republican Party to resign? And what are you going to do about your staffers that were at this hate rally where they were threatening our lives? We were in lockdown, Congressman. We were in lockdown. I had to explain that to my kids
You're trying to deflect attention from the fact that you brought one of the most anti-American members of the House to this community.
I don't know what you're
Your
talking
campaign
about.
put out a press release announcing that she would be campaigning with you. Stop lying to the people of this community.
All right, we're sort of in the weeds here. If I can, let's go back to another big issue, which you both have been deeply involved in, and that is gun reform. Congressman, after the horrific massacre in Las Vegas where 58 people were shot to death, murdered, you introduced a bill in Congress to ban bump stocks. You have been endorsed by Everytown for gun safety, and yet you have said that his support for gun control legislation is kind of not sincere, not genuine. I mean, do you believe that, in fact, he is not for these bills that he introduced?
Well, the bump stock bill that he likes to talk about never went anywhere, right? And I've been talking about this issue for years, not just now that I'm campaigning. As you know, it's a very personal issue for me.
Right.
And what I've seen from this Congress member is that he's taken thousands of dollars from the NRA. The NRA actually spent over $60,000 to help him get elected. He voted against universal background checks, which more than 94% of Americans agree that we need to start with that. And he hasn't brought any sort of comprehensive gun reform bill to the floor when he's had his party in the majority. So I think it's an opportunistic issue for him.
All right. Well, let's give him a chance to respond.
So,
Congressman.
Everytown USA, the most prominent gun safety organization in the country, is endorsing me in this race, not my opponent. Fred and Maria Jose Wright, the parents of Jerry Wright, a young man who was murdered in Orlando at the Pulse nightclub, they are supporting me. Why? Because we have worked together to bridge the partisan gap on this issue. Anyone who cares about these issues, whether it's guns, immigration, taxes, the debt, whatever it is, has to understand that the only way we're going to get anything done in Washington, D.C. is if there are people in both parties working towards those goals. And that's why these organizations and these individuals are supporting me now. If she wants to diminish Fred and Maria, if she wants to diminish Everytown USA, that's up to her. I'm honored to have their support.
All right, we're going to pick up right there when we come. We are back with the congressional seat, District 26 debate, sticking with the question of gun law. Just Debbie Merkel-Powell, you have said here and in your ads how it is so personal to you as your father was shot to death. Our condolences. How difficult to even talk about that. But you've made this part of your campaign. What you haven't made part of the campaign is the context of his death in Ecuador in the 90s and how different the laws governing 1990s Ecuador when it comes to guns are from U.S. law now. And in the current climate of U.S. gun law, how does that affect your policy?
That's a very good question. I have to tell you that it was a very difficult issue for me to bring up publicly. And the reason why I decided to do it and make it a part of my campaign is because every single time that we see these shootings, the Vegas shooting, the Parkland shooting, and we see no action, all those feelings of frustration, of pain come back. And I want to ensure that no one has to get the call that I did when I was called to. And it's a different context, but the pain is the same.
But I guess the question is, if I could just drill you down, how would you even do that, seeing as the congressman has floated some bills, other people have floated bills, there has been some movement, but not a lot. So what would you do in this climate to change that?
I think that that's why it's so important to elect people that will have the political will and the political courage to do that. If we get a majority in November, I am sure that we will at least have a bill that will be able to be introduced to the floor, that we can have a serious debate and discussion on that. And so let me tell you, I have met MJ Wright and her husband, and I share with them the pain. I can't imagine. I lost my father. I can't imagine what it would be like to lose a child. And it's one of the main reasons why we can't afford to have no action as it pertains to gun regulation.
Congressman, I think you've already spoken to that. Let me move on to the subject of Dreamers and DACA. You spent a lot of time in this last session of Congress trying to get a bill to the floor that would have given Dreamers legal resident status, would have protected them. You failed by 2 votes. Is it possible? I mean, good try. I mean, is that good enough?
Michael, we can't stop trying. This issue has been around since 2001. And throughout the last 17 years, both parties have failed at different instances where it could have gotten done. We gave it everything we could this Congress, and we actually made a lot of progress. We got 121 Republicans on the record, a majority of the majority, supporting a path to citizenship for Dreamers. That's going to be very useful, perhaps even in the lame duck Congress, to get a deal done on immigration. Now, we did, because we forced the Speaker's hand, and we got a bill to the floor that would have given path to citizenship to Dreamers, 2 million of them. These are young people who have no certainty today and who could lose their status at any minute. These are people I know, friends of mine. We had a lot of Republicans vote no on that bill, and they joined every Democrat voting no on that bill. This was an opportunity to actually get something done. Sadly, on immigration, a lot of people on the far left and the far right prefer the politics of immigration rather than the solutions for immigration.
Let me give Ms. Merkel-Powell
And you
opportunity
know,
to talk
as an
about
immigrant and being surrounded by immigrants in our community, it's an issue that we have to put at the forefront if we get elected in November. Now, let me tell you something. I get dizzy listening to Congressman Curbelo say a lot of things that are really just not true, because he had an opportunity, for someone that talks about bipartisanship, he had an opportunity to sign on to a Clean Dream Act that had over 200 sponsors. Congresswoman Ilana Ross-Layton supported that bill, and he didn't do that. Now, the bill that he's talking about with 121 Republican sponsors had 0 Democrats that signed on to that bill, and it was because it was a very conservative bill that left thousands of dreamers without any sort of path to citizenship. And what we need to do is continue the conversation. And I do agree with you, Congressman. It's been too long. It's been decades. Both parties have failed to do that. This is the time to do it. And I can assure you, if Democrats win, we will bring that to the floor.
I'll tell you right now, the last time the Democrats fully controlled the government, they did 0 for Dreamers, and they had 60 votes in the Senate. The reason that that bill didn't have any Democratic support is the reason a lot of my Democratic colleagues, who are good friends of mine, told me. They said, we think this is a good bill, but politically, Pelosi won't let us vote for it.
Let's take now 30 seconds to 45 seconds for some closing, your chance to make your pitch. Since it's okay with you, since you spoke last, we'll give the challenger the first closing argument.
Thank you, Glenna. Look, I have worked in this community for over 20 years, working hands-on to try to improve the lives of so many families that live in District 26. It's the reason why the Miami Herald endorsed me, because we need an authentic leader that's going to go to Washington and fight for our families, not a referee that will stand by the sidelines and make bad calls time and time again. I am willing to take that fight on, and I can tell you that I will represent everyone in my community as it pertains to health care. Improving the access and reducing costs. The environment, which is now such a threat to the country and to the globe. We have 12 years to get it right. We have no time to lose as it pertains to the environment. And common sense gun reform laws. We owe it to the families that have lost a loved one to gun violence. We owe it to our children. I'm ready to do that.
Congressman Curbelo?
Thank you, Glenna. Thank you, Michael. And thank you so much to my opponent. So my opponent says we need a blue wave. The president has said we need a red wave. I think they're both wrong. I think what we need is a wave of decent, honest people who are willing to go to Washington, work in a bipartisan way, and put the country and our community first. I have done that for 4 years. I have tried to fix our nation's broken politics. There is still a lot of work to do, but if we elect more people who are willing to work together, who are willing to cross the aisle, who are willing to put partisanship aside, I think we can get it done. That's what I've done for this community. It's my commitment to continue doing that for another 2 years if given a chance. Thank you.
Congressman Curbelo, glad to have you come in. Debbie Mukersel-Powell, thank you for coming in. We really appreciate it. Good for the small d democratic process. Have the candidates right here.
Very valuable. Stay with us. We'll be right back.